Overture and Beginners, The Actor, the Painter, and the Little Brown Dog by Betty Valentine. Introduction. Douglas Porter waited quietly outside the stage door, smoking a forbidden cigarette. Various show people came and went. Finally, he spotted Todd, as he was walking along chatting to someone who looked like a dancer. They kissed, and the dancer disappeared inside the theatre. 30 seconds later, Todd was pulled into an alley and slammed hard against the wall. Doug put his arm across Todd's throat before he could scream. "This is where it ends," he said quietly, waving a crumpled piece of paper. He let Todd breathe a little. He didn't want a murder on his hands. "Do you know what you did, Todd? This is the filth you sent to my little brother. It nearly destroyed him. He took an overdose and tried to end it all. Luckily for him, he puked, and that made a difference to the number of pills and the amount of booze in his system. Don't speak, just listen. I never want to hear your whiny voice again, you poisonous little shit." He produced a padded envelope. "There's 25 grand in here. Good old-fashioned, untraceable cash. It's not from me, it's from Jimmy. Personally, I wouldn't pay you a penny, you spiteful bastard. But Jimmy just wants rid of you. He said you would take a handout because you had zero self-respect. You get it if you sign this agreement to say you will never contact him again. That's it. Well done. Oh, you can keep the pen, by the way. It's cheap and nasty. Bit like you, Todd. Now get out of my sight before I do something I've wanted to do every single day for the past 2 years." "Oh, sod it. I'll never get another chance," he said, punching Todd in the mouth and walking away into the rain. He wiped his hand on his coat and he got into a car. The driver flicked the ash from her cigarette with a beautifully manicured nail. "All done?" she said, taking a drag. Doug nodded, flexing his fingers. "Did you hit him?" "Yes." "Enjoy it?" "What do you think?" "I think we need a stiff drink and some ice on those knuckles, dear." They sped off into the night. Chapter 1. I'm not quite sure where I should begin. At the beginning, I suppose. My name is James Porter, but the world knows me as Allan. I am a short, chubby chap who is now over 60 and truly thinks that he looks like the back end of a bus. People tell me I am adorable in the way they would speak to a Labrador who wants scratching between the ears. I am, and always have been, openly gay. I have absolutely no problem with this whatsoever. If anyone else finds it awkward, then that's for them to sort out. In the past, I was generally attracted to good-looking young men in their 30s who always seemed to let me down and leave me heartbroken. I am the faithful type. Unfortunately, my beautiful boys didn't always feel the same. I have lost count of the times that I've thought that this was the one, only to find out that my one had other ideas and had formed a secret two with someone else. Oh, I have forgotten to mention I'm an actor, well, quite a famous one. People call me a national treasure. This makes me sound like I should be in a glass case sitting next to Dame Judi Dench and surrounded by security. I'm not a treasure. I am a performer who, through hard work, a little talent, and a fair bit of luck, has managed to make a more than decent living from the profession. I give back by working for Equity, theatrical charities, and mentoring acting students. When I reached 50, I started to be offered character parts. The phone never stopped ringing, and my agent was one happy lady. Between television, theatre, and the occasional film role, I'm rarely out of work. I can afford to turn things down, and I will if it's rubbish, but I love what I do. Some years ago, I kicked the last younger lover out of my bed. Plenty of them have used my mattress as a springboard to higher things, treading on me to climb the ladder. I decided that enough was enough, and that Todd would be the last. I had been hurt once too often. I'm not saying I went celibate or anything. Oh, God forbid. That should never happen. I like sex. Well, who doesn't? I simply decided to stop looking for the one and to keep my relationships on a much more casual basis. I didn't sleep around, but occasionally I would indulge myself if the feeling was mutual. At the time, I was pretty sad about it all, if I'm honest. I had always hoped that one day I would find a long-term partner and settle down to a life of domestic bliss with the man of my dreams. The world's a funny place. I am telling you all this because when I stopped looking for Mr. Right, I found him somewhere I'd never even considered looking. Then I almost lost him a couple of times, but I got him back again. This is our story. It all started one lovely September day when I realised that my windows needed painting. Wendy, my neighbour, had recently had hers done when I was away working on a film. They showed mine up as being in dire need of attention. I have to be a little careful in my line of work. I can't risk some reporter going down my bins and telling the world what loo roll I use or whether I prefer a particular brand of condom. That's nobody's business except my own, and I make sure it stays that way. This is London, not Beverly Hills. I live in what I consider to be a rather beautiful house on a smart but ordinary street which faces a large park. To my neighbours, I am just Jim, the bloke up the road, who's an actor. We also have a television writer, a concert pianist, and an ex-archbishop living in our street, so I'm nobody special. I asked Wendy for a recommendation, and she told me the windows were painted by an old friend named Peter Clark. He had recently sold his firm of decorators because he'd been ill with heart trouble. Now he just worked part-time for himself to keep his hand in. Wendy's place looked amazing, so I got him to give me a quote for all the windows, the ornamental stonework, and the front door. My house is Victorian and has lots of fancy bits which were looking pretty grim. The quote seemed reasonable, and I trusted Wendy, so I engaged him to do the work without meeting him. When I came home late from a dinner the night before he started, I found a scaffolding tower in the front garden. It hadn't even occurred to me that we would need one. It was irritating, but you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, so I shrugged to myself and ignored it. Well, I don't do mornings. I'm not generally a grump, but I am a heavy sleeper, and it takes me a while to get going. If I ever got lucky and had company for the night, he usually ended up making his own tea and toast long before I'd surfaced. Actors work funny hours. If we are filming, it's up and out early. If we are acting in the theatre, it's get home late and have a lay-in. At the time I'm talking about, I was in a detective series set in the 1930s. It was proving popular. I'm never the hero, I'm far too cuddly. In this case, I was the lovable sidekick, the detective sergeant who did all the legwork but never got the girl. There was some talk about the writers considering a possible romantic interest for my character, but it never really happened. Personally, I had always thought of him as being secretly gay, but I never said anything. It was my creation and purely in my own head, and that I could do with my creature pretty much what I wanted to do with him. It was during a break in filming that I'd been offered a decent West End play to keep me ticking over until the new year. I had 3 weeks off to learn the script before rehearsals started properly. As a young actor, I never used to learn my lines before we start. You can get into bad habits that way, and they're hard to break when you start to rehearse. A theatrical production is no longer a case of learn your lines and don't trip over the furniture, dear. Those days are very much a thing of the past. It is a collaborative process, and a great many things can change during the rehearsal period. That being said, now that I'm a little older and I'm generally one of the leads, I like to ensure I have it all in there before we start. I have enough experience and the confidence to be able to be flexible in my approach and to make a change when necessary. I was looking forward to a break. It had been a busy year and I was tired. We were having an Indian summer and the weather was fabulous, perfect for painting apparently. I was awoken that first morning by tuneless singing outside my bedroom window. I lay there for a bit, unusually cranky and out of sorts. When it didn't stop, I got pissed off and went to find the source of the noise and tell him to shut it. The source was a tallish, skinny individual of my own vintage, with rather sticky-out ears and dark floppy hair. He was wearing headphones and singing along to something without a care in the world. I tapped on the window and he looked up and grinned. It was wonky. Then I realised he was conducting himself with a paintbrush and thoroughly enjoying himself. I opened the window and I said, "Oi, Andre Previn, I'm paying you to work, not sing. Could you shut the fuck up? I'm trying to sleep in here." I'm not usually rude, but for some reason he'd really annoyed me. He gave me a dirty look and said, "Sorry." Then he got on again, without the singing, thank God. But he started humming, and I lost it. "Jesus," I said. "Wendy told me you were okay. What sort of dickhead are you?" He looked me straight in the eye and said quietly, "Apparently, I'm the sort of dickhead that works for people like you, Mr. Porter. I'm only doing this because Wendy asked me, and she's an old friend. Wendy said you were a decent bloke, but anyone can make mistakes. I can just as easily go somewhere else, mate. I don't need the money, and I don't need to be spoken to like the tea boy by some pint-sized lovey who obviously believes his own publicity. As it happens, I haven't started yet. You let it get in a right old state, so I have to clean everything and sand it down first, which is going to take me some time. If you don't want it doing, you better say now before I get going. I'll be sending you a bill for my time in the scaffolding tower anyway. It's your choice, pal. So what is it, yes or no? Makes boggle difference to me. I'll go fishing instead." I snapped. "Oh, just get on with it, but do it quietly." I slammed the window, narrowly missing my own fingers, and stomped off back to my room. When I got back into bed, I realised it was 11:45. No wonder I was cranky. I'd been out cold for almost 12 hours. Oversleeping always gave me a headache and made me feel like crap. Embarrassed and feeling a bit of a twat, I got up and had a long reflective shower. There is something about standing naked in that little glass box. It cuts you off from the world for a while and allows you to think. I was more than a bit ashamed of myself, and I resolved to make amends as soon as possible. Wendy called round. We are good friends, but she doesn't sugar the pill, and she takes no prisoners if you get on the wrong side of her. "What the hell did you do to Pete?" she said. "He thinks you're a complete knob, Jimmy. It's not like you." She held up her finger and thumb. "He is this close to telling you where you can stuff your job, and now I'm getting it in the neck because I persuaded him to do it in the first place. Peter's really a decent bloke and an old friend. He's got a very long fuse and it takes a lot to upset him. So I suggest you sort it out or you end up painting your own bloody windows, Jim." She left without saying goodbye, which was unlike her, and I realised I had a lot of making up to do. He wasn't there when I went outside. I asked Wendy and she said he'd gone fishing to calm himself down and he'd be back next day, if I was lucky, and I knew I had behaved appallingly. I'm not a diva, at least I don't think I am. I have a bit of a temper and occasionally it will get the better of me, but generally I'm fairly easygoing. I spent the rest of the day working in my study. I never even noticed that he'd come back. I had an event to go to in the evening. I was presenting an award. They like you to be there early so that you can do a little rehearsal and they can mic you up and check that you've got the right envelope. I was ready in my dress suit, shoes polished by 5:30. I'm always punctual. Being late is unprofessional and it looks sloppy. My car didn't arrive, which made me rather stressed. At 5:45 I phoned them. There had been a massive cock-up at the car hire firm, and my car had gone to someone else. I was livid, but there wasn't much I could do. A new car would never have made it across London in time. I thought about the tube, but it was rush hour, so that was out. I fully admit I was panicking. I called a cab, but that would take too much time to get to me as well. I also stood on the doorstep for it to appear. Mr. Clark climbed down from the scaffolding tower and gave me a look. "What's the matter with you?" he said, making it perfectly clear that he didn't really care about whatever it was I was stressing over. I told him I was late for an event and that I didn't like letting people down, especially a charity. I remember that he rolled his eyes. It was obvious he thought I was a hopeless prat. "Well, you won't be any good to anyone if you have a coronary, Mr. Porter," he said wearily. "Much against my better judgment, I'll take you. We can't be letting anyone down now, can we?" I looked over at his battered transit. By this point, I was pretty much ready to try anything. No, we can't go in my van," he said. "It's covered in paint and dog hairs, and that, if I'm not mistaken, is a Savile Row suit. My uncle was a tailor's cutter, and I do know a decent handmade whistle and flute when I see one. Give me 10 minutes. You have a drink or a smoke or whatever you do to calm yourself down." My unlikely saviour roared off into the distance, and I lit up. True to his word, he turned up 10 minutes later on a huge motorbike. "Here," he said, passing me a crash helmet. "Hang on tight, Mr. Porter, because I won't be stopping. Get your hair done when we get there." I had a boyfriend in my first year at drama school who loved bikes. I spent most of our relationship clinging on to him as we roared off somewhere. The lover is gone, but the fondness for riding pillion has remained. We zipped up side streets and down alleys that I had no idea were even there. He seemed to know where he was going, so I sat back and let him get on with it. It was a close call. We arrived in the nick of time. I started to say thank you, but he told me to scoot. He said he would pick me up if I had trouble getting home. As I hurried away, I distinctly remember thinking that perhaps he was a decent bloke after all. The next morning I was up early, but he wasn't around. There was a note through the door saying he'd gone to buy paint. I had an appointment with my agent, and then I met up with a couple of old friends for coffee, had lunch with my brother Doug, and it was mid-afternoon before I got to thank him. I made tea. Mr. Clark was having his own lunch, sitting beside the door of the painter's van, and I bought him out a mug. I noticed that he had a dog with him. It was a small brown terrier sitting in a basket. Mr. Clark looked up. He had this odd look on his face and seemed a bit uncertain, as if he didn't quite know how to react. I strongly suspected he still thought I was a bit of an arsehole, and if he did, he was right, because I'd certainly acted like one. I remember being at a bit of a loss for what to say to him, so I kept it simple. "I brought you a cup of tea and some biscuits," I said. "I was so very grateful for the lift last night. Sorry I was rude yesterday, Mr. Clark. I had no idea it was almost lunchtime. I'd overslept, and it sort of throws me out." He nodded and said, "Thanks," and he took the drink off me. "Can we start again?" I said. "I don't normally behave like such a tit. I just overslept and got out of bed on the wrong side." I put my hand out in what I hoped was a gesture of reconciliation. He grinned, and I noticed that it was still distinctly crooked on one side. It made him look a bit quizzical, like he was thinking about something. He shook my hand and he said, "Yeah, okay, I'll try and keep the noise down in future, Mr. Porter." I shouldn't have reacted like that anyway. I'm not exactly lovable first thing in the morning myself, if I'm honest. I do tend to get a bit carried away conducting if it's classic FM, he said, taking a swig. "Oh, me too," I said. "But generally I use a spatula or fish slice when I'm listening in the kitchen." "Oh, aren't we the cultured pair?" He sipped his tea thoughtfully. He declined a biscuit and told me he was trying to eat less processed food because of his heart problem. "I'm also trying to give up the cigs," he sighed as he watched me light up. "But I don't have a problem with anyone else smoking, except jealousy, Mr. Porter, so go ahead." I said he could call me Jim if he liked, and I explained that Allan was really only my stage name. There was already a James Porter when I joined Equity, so I had to choose another first name, I told him. "Anyone who knows me calls me Jim or Jimmy." He nodded. "Better call me Pete then," he said, "because Mr. Clark sounds like a bank manager. I'm a James too, as it happens. Peter James Compton Clark, that's the full set." "Compton, that's posh. I'm just plain old James Edward Porter," I said, munching on a biscuit. "I'm named after two old Arsenal players," he told me, "Alex James and Dennis Compton. Mum reckoned after 5 girls my dad should have a turn because I was definitely going to be the last one." 5 sisters, that must have been fun. He shook his head. "Next one up's 14 years older than me, then 2-year gap between each of the others. They'd all left home before I started school. It was like having another 5 mums, to be honest." He finished his tea and said, "Well, I'd better get on. I have a lot of work to do. It was nice talking to you, Jim, and I'm glad we cleared the air." The dog sat up and stretched. I stroked it between the ears, as it seemed friendly. I was a little envious. I'd always wanted a dog. At the time I was single and went away a lot, so it wasn't really an option. "What's his name?" I asked, as it licked my hand. "Jerry," said Pete, "after the model Jerry Hall, because he had very long legs as a puppy. Rest of him caught up eventually, but for a while we thought he might be quite tall. However, he's turned out to be a little shorty after all." "Nothing wrong in that," I said, feeling a bond with Jerry immediately. Peter looked a bit worried. "You don't mind me bringing Jerry, do you, Jim? Only he misses me and he sulks if I leave him at home." I said I didn't mind at all, as long as Jerry was well behaved and didn't leave his calling card anywhere. "Ah, Jerry's a good lad. He won't be any trouble," Pete said, picking up a brush. "Besides, he's a lazy article and probably sleep all day if I let him." To prove a point, Jerry turned his back on the pair of us, farted and went back to sleep. Pete Clark shrugged. "See what I mean?" I gave my new four-legged pal a look. "Just as well he's outside then," I quipped. I handed Pete an envelope. He frowned and opened it. "I owe you for theatre tickets," I explained. "For the first night of my play. It's a comedy. I hope you like it. I just wanted to say thank you and try to make up for my appalling behaviour." He waved a hand and said there was no need, but he would try and make it anyway. Over the next couple of weeks became quite friendly. I would wander out to his van about lunchtime, have a bit of a chat, and to pat Jerry. Pete was funny. He had a very refreshing and honest outlook on the world. If you have a famous face, you get used to the fact that people will put an act on with you. Pete was different. It was obvious from the day we met that he didn't give a monkey's about me being famous. He admitted that he'd never seen my series because it wasn't his type of thing. He did say he might give it a whirl one day just to see what I got up to, but he wasn't making any promises. I began to look forward to our little talks. We had some fascinating lunchtime chats. Nothing was off the menu. Everything from A to Z. Probably the most interesting one was G. G for God and G for gay. I was opening my post and waiting for Pete to finish what he was doing. He climbed down the ladder as I was reading. I distinctly remember he was wearing painter's whites and a manky grey t-shirt that said, "Deal with it," or something like that. He sat down next to me and wiped his hands. "What's up with you?" he asked. I shrugged and sighed. "There's a letter from my pet crank. We all get them from time to time. If you're in the public eye, people think they own you." "So what's his problem then?" Pete asked, chewing on a sandwich. "What do you think? He wants me to burn in hell with a red-hot poker up my arse because I am a rancid sodomite, apparently." Passed him the letter. He scanned it and made a face. "Jesus, that's sick. He needs locking up." I shrugged and said it went with the territory. "Doesn't it bother you?" he asked, swigging his tea. I nodded and had a few drinks of my own brew. Yes, of course, but I'm far more concerned that he's managed to get my home address, to be honest. There are always people that use religion to have a go at you. It's the fundamentalists that get me, the ones like him who say that they follow the Bible to the letter. The good book does not look too kindly upon the rainbow community, Peter. It's sheer hypocrisy. They pick and choose the bits of religion that suit them. They want me to conform to the teachings of their 2,000-year-old manual and stop my naughty gay ways. I have said that the day they all start going to work on a donkey, give up painkillers and get paid in shekels or whatever, maybe I'll take notice. But until then, I live life my way. I might be a queer, but at least I'm an honest one. Peter scanned the letter again. "I don't suppose it would do any good to tell the police." "Not really," I told him. "Anyway, he won't ever do anything. That sort never do. Probably has a few mummy issues of his own. He lets all his anger out by writing filth to me because he sees me on the telly every week and he knows that I'm happily gay." He handed the papers back and set my lighter to it. Pete clapped me on the back and said, "Good for you." "I'm a Jew," he said. "We know a bit about persecution too. Anyone who appears different, same old story told in different ways. If the Jews know all the words to the song of historic prejudice, you can guarantee the Rainbow Army is right there singing along with them too, Pete." I can't say it thrills me to know that there are probably about a dozen countries on this planet where I can still be executed just for wanting to love in the way I want to love. But the world is changing. I can hide, or I can stand and fight. I've never apologized to a bigot, and I never will. I'm famously gay and totally unashamed of it. I hope that inspires others with confidence. I get letters like this, and I had the odd kicking in my time, but I bow to nobody because I have every right to be me. Pete just nodded and carried on eating his lunch. Finally, he said, "You know what, Jim? When we first met, I thought you were another spoiled, useless prat. I was wrong, and I admire you for standing up for who you are. You obviously made much stronger stuff than I gave you credit for." I smiled and said, "Thanks, Pete, that means a lot." And we both got on with our afternoon. I discovered that he was a keen backgammon player. He told me he often played against a friend he called Bobble. I always wanted to learn, and the very next day he turned up with a set, which he said I could keep because he had several others at home. He explained to me that the counters were called stones because the game was an ancient one, was probably played with pebbles originally. He showed me how you start at opposite ends of the board and all the other bits you need to know. I was fascinated. I have always loved board games, although I am a hopeless at chess. He was surprisingly patient and a very good teacher. Occasionally he would say things like, "Think about that move for a moment, Jim. Is there a better one in there?" We spent quite a few lunchtimes playing when I had the hang of it. One afternoon we played in the pub for a couple of hours because it was raining and he couldn't work. Pete told me I was improving, and once or twice I even beat him. I became an addict. I always had a game laid out in the dressing room now. It's surprising how many theatrical people play. I grew to like him enormously, and I hoped that I'd found a new friend. I've always thought it wise for an actor to have mates outside show business. It keeps your feet on the ground and it stops you from getting too up yourself. One afternoon, Pete asked me if I was busy and if I wouldn't fancy a trip out for the day. I said I didn't have anything planned, and he told me he had to go and pick some paint up at a trade place in Southend. He promised me fish and chips if I gave him a hand shifting the paint. Oh, why not? It was nice to have a break from learning a script. We set off after the rush hour and had the paint loaded by 1. We had time for a walk on the beach with Jerry and fish and chips as promised. Pete even took a selfie of us with Jerry in the middle, wriggling away and trying to lick my face. It was a happy day. I treated Pete to a beer when we got back, and I went to bed that night feeling relaxed and pretty good. One sunny Friday evening, just after rehearsals had started, I came home and noticed Pete's mobile on the windowsill. You know what it's like? Losing your phone is like losing an arm. I knew that he would be worrying. If it were me, I'd be frantic. I decided to take it round to him. He had told me the day before that he would be finishing early because he was going out. He needed to get home to shower and change. He joked that the smell of brush cleaner wasn't his favourite choice as an aftershave. I copied an address from his quote. His house was on the far side of the park, so I went for a stroll. The wardrobe supervisor for the play was a lovely woman, but blunt to the extreme. She had told me straight that I could do with losing a couple of inches round my waist, or she would have to let my costume out. That would have been embarrassing, to say the least. I decided on an evening walk. It seemed like a good idea to get some exercise and keep out of the biscuit tin. It was a problem at the time. When I lived on my own, there was nobody to tell me not to, so I just pleased myself. That's why I'm a little on the tubby side. It was a pleasant stroll. The leaves were just beginning to turn, and there was a faint chill of approaching autumn in the air. I've always found the park in winter to be a damp, depressing place, and I avoid it if possible. But autumn's different. It's romantic, theatrical, and colourful. I love it, probably because it appeals to the actor in me. I will never forget that walk. I kicked through the leaves and watched the squirrels for a while. They were chasing up and down the trees in search of food. I was almost sorry when it was over and the park gates came into view. The houses on the other side of the park were similar to my own, but just a little smaller, 2 floors instead of 3. I found Pete's place easily enough. His van was parked outside along with the bike. I noticed that his front door needed painting. It reminded me of something my granddad used to say about the cobbler's children being the worst shod. I knocked a couple of times, and after a minute or two he answered. I was surprised to see that he was smartly dressed in a black tie. I could smell a rather expensive aftershave instead of Terps. I'd obviously caught him on his way out to somewhere fancy. Pete had a phone clamped to his ear as he waved me into the hall and wandered off. I could hear him talking quietly to someone while I waited. Finally, I heard him say goodbye, and he reappeared apologizing. I shrugged and held the mobile up, saying, "You left it on the windowsill. I thought you might need it." That's where I left it. I couldn't think. I was getting a bit worried. My entire life's on that phone. Contacts, photos, even a number for Jerry's dog groomer. Thank you, Jim. You're a star. Couldn't do without it. Modern life, I shrugged. And I said I wouldn't keep him because I could see he was off out. Where's Jerry? I asked. Pete waved his hand and said, "Oh, he's gone to my mate Bobble's for the night. We often dog sit for each other. He's got Jerry's brother Archie, and they always get on well." I had to ask, "Well, why on earth is he called Bobble?" "Robert Babolshkoy," he said, running a finger round his collar like a small boy at a wedding. "His dad's family are Polish, way back. Bobby Babolshkoy is not an easy one to get your head round, so I always called him Bobble, and even when we were little. So it stuck. I'm not sure he'll ever get rid of it. Even his wife calls him Bobble, unless he's in the doghouse, then he gets called a lot of other stuff." "Go through to the kitchen," he breezed, saying, "I'm just going to get out of this lot. I had a date, but she's cancelled. Won't be a minute." He disappeared upstairs, and I sat at the table. It was a real cook's kitchen. I could tell that from the equipment. There was a gleaming set of knives on a magnetic strip attached to the wall. I also noticed the lit Shabbat candles in the ornate holder. "It's Friday night," he said from the doorway. "I told you I'm Jewish. Mum's family came from Russia a few generations back. I'm named after my grandfather, who was called Peter Orloff," he continued. "The family came over when I was a boy, just like Bobble's lot. They arrived in the great wave of immigrants that settled in the East End in the 19th century. To be honest, Jimmy, I don't really bother with all the rest of it. I love a bacon roll, and I haven't been in a synagogue in years, but I do like to light the candles once in a while. It reminds me of my old mum." I smiled and said, "We all have our little traditions, Pete. It's what makes life interesting. My family are Scots originally. We still celebrate Burns Night, but that's about it." It occurred to me that apart from his name and his religion, and the fact he had 5 sisters and liked fishing and backgammon, I knew very little about my new friend. He let out a huge sigh, saying, "Oh, that feels better. I hate being dressed up like a monkey's uncle. I had this date, but there'd been some sort of power cut at the golf club, so it's off." I was surprised. I never imagined you as a golfer, Pete. I thought fishing was your thing. He made a face. "Oh, Sandra, my new lady friend, she plays. To be honest with you, it's a bit of relief to get out of it because it's not my sort of thing. All that polite small talk and pretending to be interested in their boring golfing chat." "Why go then?" I asked. He looked a bit sad and shrugged, and then said, "Better than staying in, I suppose, on my own." He frowned. "Sandra's a nice woman, but she's a bit too bossy for my taste, Jimmy. I don't like being ordered about, as you may have noticed. We have been out a couple of times, but I don't think it's going anywhere, to be honest." "Never mind," I told him. "It's not easy being on your own when you get a bit older, is it?" He shook his head and said, "Fancy a beer, Jim, unless you've got to get back for something." I hadn't anything on, and I was as free as air for the evening, so he invited me to stay for dinner as well, because he had a couple of decent steaks in the fridge. Turned out we both liked to cook, so we swapped a few recipes while he made dinner. His collection of cookbooks were impressive and almost as extensive as my own. He told me he made all his own bread and preserves, and he gave me a jar of pickles to take home. I said I enjoyed entertaining, but I found the big dinner parties a pain, and I would rather them sooner for my family and friends. Pete uncorked a decent bottle of wine, and we talked while we ate, and then the backgammon came out. He opened up a little. He told me he was a widower with 2 grown-up children, one of each. He and his wife had separated years before, but they'd remained friends and never divorced. She had taken the kids off to live in Australia to start a new life, and that had been very tough on him. He showed me photos of his 3 grandchildren, 2 small girls and a boy living in Sydney. Every couple of years he visited them and then Skyped most weekends. The bottle got lower, and I ended up talking about Todd, my ex. Pete was a good listener. It had been years since I'd spoken about it openly with anyone except my brother Doug. By the time we uncorked the second bottle, I couldn't stop myself. I told Pete that Todd had cheated on me more than once, and I had always forgiven him. "Finding him in our bed with a 21-year-old dancer was the very last straw," I said, downing my glass. "My brother, who's a barrister, made me see sense. He arranged for Todd's credit cards to be cancelled, and all the locks had to be changed within an hour of me kicking him out. He even got me a new number for my phone in case I weakened. It was a bad time, Pete. Todd didn't give up easily. He tried every trick in the book, including blackmail. He threatened to go to the papers with lurid details about our private life. I'm not quite sure who he was doing all these things with, but it certainly wasn't me, I can tell you. My brother Doug has 3 boys. The youngest was only 11 at the time. I didn't want them reading Todd's rubbish in the paper or on the net. Some of it was scandalous, the rest just perverted. I never knew he had that much imagination, to be honest." "Sounds like a right wanker," Pete said, pouring himself another glass and topping mine up. I nodded. "He was. In the end, I paid him off just to get rid of him. It wasn't that much. He was a pretty cheap date, really. I would have paid more. I can't for the life of me understand what on earth I ever saw in him, to be honest." I carried on rabbiting away, but Pete didn't seem to mind. After Todd had gone, I got the bedrooms completely remodelled. I bought a new bed, made the spare room my own by knocking through into a dressing room next door and making an expensive ensuite. It was silly, but I didn't want to move house, and I had absolutely no desire to sleep in the room where he cheated on me God knows how many times. I didn't want to know. I just tried to wipe that nasty little shit from the map and move on with my life. Pete put his head to one side. "Good for you," he said, lighting up 2 of my cigarettes and passing me one. I blew out a plume of smoke. "Todd had one more go. He couldn't phone me, and I got a restraining order to keep him away from the house, so he sent me a letter instead. It was spiteful, calling me a lot of things that were meant to destroy my confidence, well, what I had left, and they did. He said that he was glad to be away from me because I was a talentless, fat little man, and that he almost threw up every time we had sex because of me slobbering all over him. He crowned it by telling me I was a theatrical joke and that people laughed at me running after young men. He really hit home when he wrote, "Nobody could have really loved an ugly little gnome like you." There was a lot more, but you get the idea. He knew how to hit me exactly where it would hurt the most. "I've always had a problem with self-image," I said, "because I am short and fat and ugly. I guess you'd have to be inside my head to understand what I mean, but he made me feel completely worthless, Pete, like nobody would ever love me again. It was horrible. I got very depressed one night. I read Todd's letter for about the 100th time, and I took an overdose. Wendy found me. She called an ambulance, and then she called Doug and Esther, my agent. I was in a pretty bad way and had to spend a few weeks in a clinic. We managed to keep it out of the papers, but Doug said no more. And the boys were all upset and worried about me, and he had had quite enough. He went to Todd. I think he probably hit him, but he would never say. And that was it. No more Todd. And I started again as a single man about town. It took a while, but here I am, and generally I'm a lot happier these days. I remember being a little embarrassed at this point because I realised that I'd been bending Pete's ear for the past 15 minutes. He didn't seem to mind. He was a very good listener. I also found out later that the dancer had given him the clap. It was poetic justice at the time. I finished up, taking another sip of my drink. Pete gave me a grin. "Bloody serves him right if he got a dose," he said, and had a long drag on his smoke. Spiteful little sod. He shook his head and waved a finger at me. "If someone really loves you, they don't care what you look like. Ugly comes from inside, and you're not ugly, Jimmy, so stop beating yourself up. I'm hardly an oil painting myself, sunshine, but I do all right." He pointed. "See this? My face, it's a bit crooked. Something to do with damage to the nerves after a fight I had when I was a lad. It isn't too bad. Ladies loved it." He winked. I remember being amused at Pete getting so animated, but it could have been the wine. "You actors live in a world based on image," he said. "If you look like a Greek god, do you think you'd still be getting the character parts that you've been telling me about? Nobody's queuing up to employ Todd, are they? If they want little old you, then they have to get in line and take a ticket." I laughed and said he had a point. He made me feel a whole lot better, and I had another drink. "I watched your series just to see what you're like, Jimmy." Pete leaned forward. "You're the best one in it by far. I was amazed at how bloody good you were." I thanked him and said a good review was always welcome. "That Inspector Cridland, he's a right bastard, isn't he?" "Well, he's only acting, Pete," I told him. "Mark Stringer, who plays Cridland's a really nice guy, an old friend from drama school." I told Pete that Mark and I were once an item about 1,000,000 years ago, and we lived together for a while we were students. It didn't work out. We'd stayed friends, and explained that although Inspector Cridland, his TV character, never smiled, Mark Stringer was a terrible corpser with a really filthy laugh. Pete was amazed and very pissed. He waved a wobbly finger at me and said quietly, "You don't have the monopoly on relationship misery, anyway, if we're being candid, Jim. As it happens, I did exactly the same thing as you after Carol left for Australia with the kids. It was so hard being away from them. There was no Skype or FaceTime in those days, just the occasional phone call, and I got very low. One night, I got some pills and washed them down with a bottle of scotch. Bobble found me, and we went with me to get my stomach pumped. Ugh, horrible business. I'll never be able to thank him enough for saving me, or apologise enough for what I put him through. So I do understand. I've been to the edge as well, Jimmy." "And we both live to tell the tale," I said. "Aren't we lucky that we have good friends and family?" We clinked glasses and drank to survival. Then we finished the second bottle and started a third. Well, we were both trashed. There was no way I could have walked home, even if I wanted to. Getting to Pete's front door was a joint effort for the pair of us. We had to hold each other up, weaving along like drunks do. In the end, he phoned for a cab, and I staggered into it. The driver only agreed to take me because the journey was short and I promised him a healthy tip in advance. Next morning, to say we were both feeling rough was an understatement. "How are you?" I asked when I surfaced about lunchtime. I remember that Pete groaned softly. He put his head in his hands and said, "I feel like you look, mate. Totally shit, to be honest." "Yeah," I agreed. "It's been a while since I had a hangover this bad. We never learn, do we?" "No, we don't," he said, gulping down some pills with water. "But perhaps it did us both good in the long run. We put the world to rights and let off a fair old bit of steam, didn't we?" I nodded and said, "You won't let on, will you, about the overdose? It's just I don't want the papers to get hold of it." Pete smiled. Of course not. I know how to keep my mouth shut, Jim. I think we both know where we're coming from on that score. I'm going to knock off now and go home and sleep for a bit. I'll be back Monday morning bright and early so you can have Sunday in peace. Then he left. As it happened, I was having friends round for Sunday lunch, so I didn't get much rest at all. On Monday, rehearsal started again, so I was kept busy for the next week, and it was Friday before I caught up again with Pete. Almost finished, he told me. If the weather's good tomorrow, I can top it off, if you don't mind me doing a Saturday morning. The house was looking great. I didn't mind at all because I was going to be there. We had a weekend rehearsal, and then I was having dinner with my agent and her son, and she was staying over with him and his family. I'm his godfather, and we have always been close. I said I'd enjoyed our time together, and I hoped that we could stay mates now the job was finished. I asked him to give me a ring so I could take him out for a curry and a pint when he was free. He said lovely, and he left with one of his cheery waves. I watched him drive off and I felt a bit down. I knew that I was going to miss our little chats. When I got back on Sunday afternoon, everything had been tidied up and there was a note through the door saying he would be in touch about the payment.